Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel Learn Law with Professor Rashmi. I am here to create content on various subjects pertaining to 3-year LLB course, 5-year BBA LLB integrated course, BMS, BBI and other courses. Do let me know in the comment section which subjects and topic you would wish to have the content from me. Today, I am starting with the series of lectures on the subject environmental law. Environmental law is one of my favorite law. Of course, it is also relevant in our day-to-day lives. This subject is for semester 2 in LLB course, for semester 5 in BBA LLB course. Also, this subject has huge prospects for research. So let's begin our lecture series on environmental law. Today's topic is Stockholm Conference. Stockholm Conference is one of the important conference in history of environmental law. Why this conference is so important? What are the details of this conference? Which principles are discussed in this conference? Let us move forward to learn one by one. This Stockholm Conference was held at Stockholm, Sweden, and therefore it is popularly known as Stockholm Conference. Its official name is United Nations Conference on Human Environment. This was the first major United Nations conference with respect to environment law or environment policies as the main topic. This conference had started from 5th June and continued for 11 days up to 16 June of 1972. Now, what is the significance of this Stockholm Conference? This Stockholm Conference is a watershed moment in international relations. It has placed the issue of environmental protection of biosphere on official agenda of international policy and law. So you will see that the first conference, United Nations major conference, where environment protection issue is placed in official agenda of global law or international policy, you can see. There were many topics and subjects which were discussed till date 1972. It may be intellectual property rights, it may be human rights and so others. But environmental law was first discussed in 1972 and that is the reason this Stockholm Conference has immense importance. This Stockholm Declaration brought powerful force in increasing public awareness as well as understanding of fragility of human environment. So each and every nation, each and every person, public started talking about this topic of environmental protection. This declaration provides basic code of international standard. What were the approaches which were discussed in the Stockholm Declaration? The first approach was that the environment is impacted because of the human development or industrialization, which is causing pollution and destruction of natural resources. Therefore, humans need to work on or emphasize on controlling the pollution and conserve the natural resources. This was the first approach. Second approach was, what was the emphasis led that? Yes, because across the globe, apart from the developed countries, there are also developing nations and underdeveloped nations which need to develop socially as well as economically. So social and economic development is the real issue. If you see these two approaches are opposite to each other, they seem to be opposite to each other. But in this particular conference, with huge discussion of different nations and the Stockholm Declaration, it came out with the beautiful concept of environmental protection and development would go hand in hand. Basically, these two approaches, which seem to be opposite, were bridged together. When there is environmental protection, yes, but also I need to seek development, and when there is development, I also need to seek my environmental protection. So this was conceptualized as two sides of a coin which are inseparable from each other. So when I talk about development, I cannot stop talking about environmental protection, and when I talk about environmental protection, I cannot stop talking about my development. So this was the first conference which brought the topic of environment on global scale, And remarkable achievement was more than 100 nations, that is 114 nations participated in this conference. This declaration demonstrates that world has just one environment. What does this mean? When I as a nation I am doing some activities, I cannot say this is my nation, my land, my territory and I can do what I want. Here, when I am talking about development, though in my territorial jurisdiction, but it is going to affect environment as a whole, because environment cannot be separated from nation to nation or country to country. Environment is one thing which is available to whole world. This declaration contains 26 important principles which talk about environment and development. India was one of the party to this conference. The then Prime Minister of our country, Indira Gandhi, had represented India in this conference. Her speech had received an immense acknowledgement, reason being, when all the countries were talking about environmental protection and development, she first time came up with the concept or the topic that eradication of poverty has to be linked with this development and environmental protection. If you see, when there is a poverty, there is a huge degradation of environment, because development is done at any cost or every cost. So basically she wanted to say that poverty has to be linked with environmental protection. Eradication of poverty has to be done. Now you will find that later, after 50 years or 50 years, you have sustainable development goals which talks about eradication of poverty. So see the insights of the lady that time she had with respect to this environment protection and development. Now I have given the principles, 26 principles of the Stockholm Declaration in nutshell. You can just pause the video and write down these principles in nutshell so that you will be able to memorize those. So in first slide I have covered this up to 8. Second slide I have covered up to 16. You have to just jot them down and you have to memorize in the way you can. Not 26 you are expected to memorize, but yes, most of them you should at least be aware of. So 26 principles I have written in nutshell. You can just write it down and you can try to memorize. Now I'll move forward and I have segregated these principles as per the different approaches or concepts. Let us see how. First is the human-centric approach. What does this mean? It is related to human. How is environment related to human? Principle 1 talks about rights and responsibilities of human in protecting environment. So yes, it is a fundamental right of man to have or to enjoy nature and environment unfettered, but at the same time it is also having, or human is also having, a duty to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. So you will see that the right and duty comes always in hand. So principle 1 is talking about rights and responsibilities of human in protecting environment. Principle 15 is talking about human settlement and urbanization. What does that mean? When I am having proper town planning or city planning, I am making planned settlements, then you will see that the adverse effects on environment would be reduced. So there should be goal that I would secure maximum benefits because of this proper town planning. These are the two human-centric approaches which are discussed in principle 1 and principle 15. Now, next concept is sustainable development. Let me tell you, before you get confused, sustainable development was the term which was not used in Stockholm Conference. Different principles were discussed which ultimately or eventually talk about sustainable development, but sustainable development is a term which was not used in Stockholm Conference. Please underline my words. Sustainable development was brought first in common use by Brundtland Commission report. Let's not go into that right now. We'll discuss in our later series of lectures. But sustainable development is a term which is not used in Stockholm Conference. Then what does sustainable development, or what does this principle, what do I mean to say? What is sustainable development? We have already seen the development which is meeting the needs of present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is the basic definition of sustainable development. So there are different principles in Stockholm Declaration like 2, 3, 4, 5, 13 and 14 which talk about this sustainable development very much, but it is not using the term sustainable development. What is the first principle? Principle 2. Principle 2 talks about duty to protect natural resources. What does that mean? Natural resources on earth, especially those are representative samples of ecosystems like air, water, land, flora, fauna, etc. must be safeguarded for the benefit of present and future generations through careful management and planning. This is what principle 2 says. Principle 3 says capacity of earth to produce vital renewable resources must be maintained and wherever possible must be restored. So though they are renewable resources, still it should be maintained and restored. Principle 4 talks about wildlife conservation, and this principle emphasizes upon a duty of man with a special responsibility or special duty of man to safeguard and wisely manage the heritage of wildlife and its habitat. Human is having a special duty to safeguard wildlife and to safeguard the habitats, because we know that if the wildlife is not in their particular habitat, it cannot survive or sustain. We have already seen extinctions of many species of wildlife. So we have to conserve, it is a duty, special duty of human to conserve these particular habitat so that wildlife is conserved. Principle 5 talks about non-renewable resources and duty to preserve them. What are non-renewable resources? Resources, of course, which cannot be renewed are non-renewable resources. So we must see that we are using these resources wisely so that they don't get exhausted for future generations to come. Principle 13 is talking about rational management of resources and also recognizing the need for international cooperation and assistance for environment protection. Principle 14 is talking about rational planning, which says that there is a need of rational planning and the importance of both development and environment can be achieved by rational planning. So you will see that all these principles are talking about the sustainable development, but sustainable development term is not used in Stockholm Conference. Do remember that always. What is the next? Preventive actions. Which principle talks about preventive actions? 6, 7, 8 and 18. Again, preventive action basically which further evolved as precautionary principle, which also forms an integral component of sustainable development. So principle 6 is talking about management of pollution. So discharge of toxic substances that release heat in the quantities that environment is not able to sustain should be stopped or halted. In order to ensure that there is a serious or irreversible damage is not inflicted upon ecosystems, we have to manage or prevent pollution. So this is basically a precautionary principle which was evolved later. Principle 7 is talking about management of sea pollution or marine pollution. Principle 8 talks about social and economic development. So social and economic development has to be attained by preserving or conserving environment. Principle 18 once again talks about precautionary principle. It says that environmental protection cannot be achieved without creating awareness about environmental matters. So this particular principle is talking about awareness. Unless and until I am aware about the after effects of the particular thing, I cannot prevent happening of that thing. This is what principle 18 is talking about. Next, compensation to victims, which further later evolved as polluter pays principle. Again, this forms an integral part of sustainable development. So what does polluter principles or compensation to victim or principle 22 says that all states should cooperate and develop a compensation mechanism for, so victim of pollution and other environmental damage should be compensated. So this is basically a polluter pays principle, which we'll see again later. Then there is a cooperation has to be between the different nations. So principle 24 is talking about cooperation with nations, and principle 25 is talking about coordination with nations. So basically cooperation should happen, developed nations should help underdeveloped and developing nations, and they should coordinate with each other with respect to development and environment protection. Now this principle 11 has abruptly come in this particular slide. Under cooperation you have to only write principle 24 and 25. Now discussing other principles or miscellaneous principles, there are different. Principle 11 is talking about environmental policies. All states should enhance the policies which are going to preserve and protect our environment. So this is basically applicable to developing countries and underdeveloped countries. So because developing countries and underdeveloped countries, you will see that development would be done at a greater pace, and there should be such environmental policies in place that would prevent or protect our environment. Principle 20 is talking about expanding scientific research. Scientific research and development in context of environment problems should happen both nationally as well as multinationally or globally, you can say. Then principle 9 is talking about environmental deficiencies. Principle 10 is talking about stability of prices and income. Principle 12 is talking about education on environmental protection, that is awareness basically. Principle 16 is talking about population control. Unless and until we control our population, there won't be effective environmental protection and development happening. Principle 17 is talking about setting up of different national institutions to see whether the environmental protection policies are followed or not. Principle 23 is again talking about implementing a national agenda, which simply means that whatever is discussed in the Stockholm Conference has to be implemented at national level. And principle 26 is talking about very important topic, that is ban on nuclear weapons. So these are the other important miscellaneous principles. After discussing this declaration in detail, let us see what are the effects of this conference or this declaration. This particular declaration paved the way for other international conventions like Convention on International Trade and in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna 1973. Also, this declaration discussed the detailed role of underdeveloped nations in environmental problems and urged them to reduce their negative impact on the environment. Governments were directed to control their internal actions, so they have to enforce the environmental laws, coordinate with other nations, seek help of other nations and international agencies, and finally or eventually mitigate the damage caused by the pollution. After having huge discussion of the Stockholm Conference, one of the important conferences in history of environmental law, let me ask you, when and why do we celebrate Environmental Day? World Environmental Day is celebrated on 5th June. And now you will know why the date is 5th June, because for the first time this particular Stockholm Conference started on 5th June, and this was the first conference which is talking about environmental protection and policies and law in global scenario. So this does come as a 2-mark question, that when the particular day is selected and when and why this particular day is celebrated. 5th June is celebrated as World Environment Day. So this is all I had to share with you on the topic of Stockholm Conference. Do let me know if you like this video. In comment section, do write whatever topics you need me to cover, and do give your recommendations and suggestions. Suggestions and recommendations are always welcome. Thank you.